We have integrated PayPal into our demo application, and we have integrated PayPal on the client side. However, there is a more secure integration, the server-side integration, and this is what we are going to do, so we are going to change our integration a bit. And the reason for that is JavaScript runs in the browser, so on the client side. And the client, for example, can figure out that, okay, I can change the amount here, and then I have to pay a bit less. Theoretically, they could also change the currency in our demo application. However, it should not work for them, even with our client-side integration. But, let me just go to our PayPal template.js file. So as you remember, we have a currency code key and a value key, and for the currency code, we set the currency in which we want to charge the customer, and for the value, we set the amount in which, we set the amount that the customer has to pay. Now, I don't think it's very simple to hack actually this integration. However, a skillful hacker could see that, hey, wait a minute, actually, if I just change this amount to a very little amount, and if I change this currency to another currency, then I can get access to a very expensive course, and I have to pay very little in a currency that is weaker than the USD, for example, or the euro, for example. Now, if they tamper with the currency here, then it will not help them, or it should not help them, because we also define the currency here. So when we are importing the PayPal JavaScript SDK, so actually if the currency here and the currency here are not in agreement, then it should be a problem, and then the checkout flow should not be finalized. However, we are still facing the issue that a skilled hacker might realize that, okay, I can just change this amount here, and then I will have to pay less for the course, and then I can cause financial damage for the owner of the website. And in order to tackle this issue, we are going to change our integration a bit. As I mentioned earlier, we are going for the server-side integration now. And even based on the PayPal demo website, you can see that the server-side integration is a bit more complicated. So as you can see, the OnApprove event is more complicated than the client-side OnApprove event. However, I think it's not overly complicated, and actually it is good that we already implemented PayPal on the client side, because now I think you have a good understanding of what is happening in the create order event and what is happening when the OnApprove event runs. So I think that now it will be much easier to implement PayPal on the server side with this knowledge behind us. Let me go to the template file, so template.js file, sorry. And actually, the create order event is going to be changed, and the OnApprove event is going to be changed. So this will become much more complicated than here in the client side. I don't think it will be overly complicated, but yeah, it will be more complicated than the code that you see here. However, the onCancel event will stay the same, and more importantly, the onClick event will stay the same. So we don't have to change anything in this onClick event for our for our server-side integration of PayPal. So, in a nutshell, we will do some more work. However, it will be worth it because our integration will be more secure. Of course, we have to make some changes in our code to change our PayPal integration. Now, I made these changes already, and I will show you how you can get these changes. So, when we pulled the project at the very beginning, obviously, we got what was in the main branch, and I'm still in the main branch of the Laravel Payment Master repository. But what you have to do to get the changes is to switch branches, and you have to put in git checkout, and we have a branch server-side PayPal. So I just put server-side and push or press tab. And yeah, it's auto-completed. So if you put this command into the terminal, git checkout server-side PayPal integration, and press enter, then you will switch to this branch. And you will get the changed files. However, just to make sure, I will pull this branch as well. So pull the contents of the branch. But it should be up to date. Yes, it is already up to date. So just make sure that you are in this branch, this server-side PayPal integration, and not in the main branch, because if you're in the main branch, you will not see the changes of the changes I made so that we can have a server-side PayPal integration. Okay, I will close this down. I will show you briefly what changed in our code. Of course, we will go into the detail later. I'm just giving you an overview of which files changed. And then we will set up our server-side integration. So we will actually have to put some more info into our admin. We have to actually give our sandbox secret in the admin, and I will show you how you can get that sandbox secret. And then we will actually get into the code and we will go through the same checkout process, but it will be a more secure, improved checkout process. Only a few files changed actually. One is the web.php file where our routes are. And what changed is that there are two new routes in it. Yes, so routes for server-side PayPal integration, the payment / create order PayPal route, and the payment / capture order PayPal / order ID route. And they are both handled by the PayPal controller, the create order PayPal method and the capture order PayPal method. And actually the other file that changed is the PayPal controller, obviously. So one thing that changed is that we are importing or using this PayPal SDK helper. I will talk about this as well in a minute, but what I want to show you first is these two new functions. So the create order PayPal function and the capture order PayPal function. And yeah, now I will show you the last file. Actually, no, this file has not been changed. We just haven't been using it so far, but it's important that you know what this file is. So this is the PayPal SDK helper, and yeah, as you can see, this is the helper sort of with which we are going to take advantage of PayPal's PHP SDK. And if you remember at the very beginning of the course, when we installed our dependencies through Composer, then we also installed the PayPal PHP SDK. So this helper is basically just a wrapper which we will use to be able to use the PayPal PHP SDK. Sorry, because actually one other file changed. Obviously, our JavaScript or PayPal Smart JS template file. So as I mentioned, the create order event changed, and as you can see, we are using the fetch API now, and we are fetching this new route, as you can see, and the OnApprove event also changed, and in the OnApprove event we are fetching our second new route. So we are hitting the capture order PayPal method of the PayPal controller. Yes, a PayPal controller. So this is what changed. As you can see, it became longer. It became a bit more complicated. I mean, the OnApprove event, but it's true for the create order event. However, now you have a good understanding of the PayPal checkout flow. So I think it won't be a problem for us to change this integration, or, to enjoy the advantages of this server-side integration. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than the JavaScript integration or the client-side integration, so to say, but I'm sure that by the end of this integration, you will have learned a lot about PayPal, and you will be able to have you will be able to implement more secure, more robust integration, PayPal integration. There are two things we have to set up before we can jump into the code. So first is that you have to navigate to the admin payments PayPal in our demo application. However, what you have to do is to come here, so in PayPal, under the payment management. And as you can see, we have the PayPal Sandbox Client ID, and this was what we needed for the client-side integration. However, for the server-side integration, we still need this ID. However, we will also need our sandbox secret in order to use the PHP SDK of PayPal. I think at this point you know where to find your secret, but of course I will show you again. So here is the developer dashboard. I have to log into mine again. And finally I'm logged in. So I'm using this business account for this demo application. and I have to go view edit account. And there are the API credentials. There is the app name, so this is the app that I'm using. And you see that here is the client ID. However, it's not enough, so I need the secret, and I just have to click on show. And the secret is a very long string, actually, that you can just copy. Yep. All right. And I will just copy it into my admin dashboard. And I will save. Yeah, cool. So now I have my sandbox client ID saved into the database and also the sandbox secret. You should also do the same. And of course, the one other thing that we have to do is to go to settings and resave our payment settings, because we changed the payment template, so the PayPal JavaScript template. So we will need a new JavaScript file to be generated based on this new template. So we have to make our changes here in the payment settings. And actually, I don't need Braintree, I don't need Stripe. However, I need the PayPal smart buttons. So I just regenerate my settings, and if I go to Visual Studio Code, then okay, there are no changes. So actually the PayPal smart file was generated correctly. Okay, so it seems that I have done this already. I just didn't remember, so it didn't have to be regenerated. However, we are going to look at the PayPal smart.js template file, and yeah. And then finally, we will see how the create order event and the OnApprove event changed. So let's check how the create order event works when we have a server-side implementation. As I mentioned earlier, the on-click event is the same, so I'm not going to start the whole, to describe the whole integration process from scratch. So we will start with the create order. So we are at the point where all the validations passed, and now we are creating the order for our customer. We have our basic form PayPal form data, and don't forget that at this point, it has all the information that we used for a validation. However, we are going to append the course ID to this form data. So the value will be a course ID and the key will be course ID in camel case. And then what we're going to do is fetch this URL. So I showed you that we have this new route, this payment/create order PayPal, and this will be picked up by the PayPal controller, and the method is post. And the body, so the request object will be this basic form PayPal, so our form data. So let's see what happens in this create order PayPal method. We will query our settings, so our checkout settings basically. And if we don't find the settings, we are returning null. Now, this should never happen, so we should always have our settings. And if we are returning null, so if still we don't have the settings and we are returning null, basically returning null means that we are breaking the whole PayPal payment process or checkout flow, so the customer will not be able to progress with the checkout. Let's move on. So then we are going to fetch the course that the customer wants to buy, and the course ID is in the request object. So this is, don't forget that this is the key value pair that we appended to the to our basic form PayPal form data. So you see the key is course ID and the value is the ID of the course that is to be bought. So we are getting the course ID from the request object. And of course, if there is no course, so if we don't find a course with this ID, which should never happen, we are returning null and we are breaking the checkout process. Later I will show you why it breaks if we are returning null, but for now just believe me that if we return null at this point, then the PayPal process is going to break. Now the next check comes from the checkout settings. So if the currency from the settings is not the same as the currency from the request, then we are returning null. So actually, if someone starts to hack our integration and wants to pay in a different currency, then this line of code, or this if branch is going to put an end to that, and the whole checkout process will break. We have another check here. So if the price of the course to be bought in our database doesn't match the amount that should be paid from the paid by the customer, then we are returning null. So otherwise, if everything is fine, so if no one is hacking around our integration, then we are going to return what the create order method of the PayPal SDK helper class returns. And we have to pass the currency into it and the total into it, so the amount that the customer has to pay. Let's now navigate to our PayPal SDK helper and let's check this create order method. As you can see, this PayPal SDK helper is in App Helpers PayPal SDK helper, and here is the create order method. This method takes two parameters, so the set currency, so the currency that is set in our database or in our demo application, and the total, so the amount that the customer has to pay. We are instantiating a new orders create request, and this is the variable, so the request variable will hold this newly instantiated object, and this orders create request object of course comes from the PayPal PHP SDK, and as you can see we are importing all these classes here at the top of our file. But let's now go back to the create order method. Now on our request object we will call the prefer method, and then we will pass this string to it, return equals representation. This is something that actually PayPal advises us to do, so I also included this line into our integration. And then when we are finished with this, then in the next line we will define the body property of this object, of this orders create request object, and we have a build request body method here, you can see. So we are calling this method and we are passing to it the currency and the total. Let's check now this build request body method. So we have an adjusted total variable, and we have an adjust PayPal amount method here in this PayPal SDK helper class, and we pass the currency and the total to it. So let's check what happens, and this should be very, very familiar to you. So this is sort of the PHP version of the JavaScript function that we used for adjusting the PayPal amount. So remember that if the PayPal amount is, or the currency is in Hungarian forints or Japanese yen or Taiwanese dollars, then we have to return an integer value of the PayPal amount. So if the value is 555.55, but we are not paying in dollars but Taiwanese dollars, then it has to be 555 and not 555.55. However, in our integration, or at least for now, in our example, we use the USD, so we are just simply returning the amount that was passed on to this function. Let's scroll up a bit. So here we are, so here we are. So we have the adjusted total variable, and now we can return this array. And this array of key value pairs should be very, very familiar to you, because it is very, very similar to what we did in our JavaScript integration. Let me go back to the demo page of the PayPal smart buttons, and let's go to the client integration. So as you can see, there is the purchase units key, there is the amount key, and then there is the value key. And this whole request body sort of was created by calling actions orders or actions.order.create. However, in our server-side integration, we need to have this build request body method, or it's better if we have this have a separate method for creating this request body, and then we have to instantiate this array ourselves, and we have to declare that the intent is captured, so we want to get paid as soon as possible. We have this application context key, and then the value, its value is an array, and then the key is shipping preference in this array. the key that we define here is the shipping preference, and the value is no shipping. And if you remember our JavaScript integration, this is exactly that we had in it, but it was a bit easier. It was a bit cleaner, I think, with the client-side integration. It's a bit more complicated to declare this application context. However, this is how we can do this server side. And very important that we have the purchase units key as well in this array, and then it contains an array, and at index 0 we have an array, and we have the amount key, and the amount key has an array that has two keys, the currency code and the value, and obviously the currency code is the set currency, and the value is the adjusted total, so the total amount that we adjusted if it was necessary. So what is happening here in this method is basically what happens here in the client-side integration. So the client-side integration is sure much cleaner, but the server-side integration is much safer. And as you can see that the customer cannot play around with the currency. So we checked in our controller if the currency was the same as the currency that we had in our settings. And we only reach this point, so we only create the order if the currency is fine, for example. So you can see that it's a much safer implementation. However, of course, it is much more complicated to implement. And of course, still we are not finished, because this is just the body property of our request object. So we are at this line of code, so we are only at the third line of code in our create order method. And what we have to do is to instantiate a client, and then we have to call execute on that client, and then we have to pass onto the execute method our request object, so our orders create request object. However, let's see how we get the client first. So we have a client method in this PayPal SDK helper class, and it should be here, yes, on the top. So here we are just returning a newly instantiated PayPal HTTP client class, or object, sorry, and this class is imported here. And the parameter or the argument of this object is the environment. It comes from, it comes from the environment method. And obviously this is the environment method, so you know what we have under this client method. So let's check what the environment method does. So we are getting our PayPal settings. So the PayPal settings is where we have our client ID and our secret. And if we don't have PayPal settings, we are returning null and breaking the whole process, but it should never happen. So we should always have our PayPal settings in the database. And then we have a client ID and a client secret, two variables, and they are both empty strings at first. However, if the PayPal smart environment in our PayPal settings is sandbox, then the client ID is going to be the sandbox client ID, and the client secret is going to be the sandbox secret. And we are returning a new sandbox environment with the client ID and the client secret. Now, of course, the sandbox environment object, so the class for it at least, is imported here. However, if this PayPal Smart environment is not sandbox, then it has to be production. So the client ID will come from our PayPal settings table, of course, but from the PayPal Smart production client column, and the client secret will come from our PayPal Smart production secret column. And we are returning a new live environment object with the client ID and client secret. And of course, this live environment is also imported at the top of this file. Okay, so let's go over it again. So we hit the create order method. We are instantiating a new orders create request. Then we just set this return representation as per PayPal's suggestion. Then for the body property, we are building the request body here. And then we are instantiating a new client. And we instantiate a new PayPal HTTP client. However, we have to get the environment, and the environment comes from this method. So either new sandbox environment or new live environment will be returned. So new sandbox environment is returned here. And now we can finally get our response. So we have our client, so this new sandbox environment client, and then we call the execute method on it, and we are passing our newly instantiated orders create request object. And then we have to return it, or we have to return a response, and we will call the JSON method on this response object, and this is how we can return from this create order PayPal method. So let's go back to the JS template, not the onClick but the create order. Yeah, we are here. So basically we are here at this point. Yes, so all these things that I told you about is only part of this this fetch request. So requesting this or fetching this payment / create order PayPal URL, and then only now we can check what was returned. So a response object was returned, and if this response is not okay, so if the OK property on this response object is not okay, then we are returning this server error PayPal string. And actually I talked about this in the previous integration, so this is just a way for me to handle server errors, but we are not expecting any server errors. So what is going to happen is that we are returning this res.json, so we are calling the JSON method on our response object, and then in the next then handler under the name order data, we are going to have our order data that we returned here, so that we returned from our create order PayPal method. And I told you that if we are returning null, we are sort of breaking the process, and this is exactly what is happening. So if we return null, and then this order data will be null, then the whole process just breaks, and then the payment will not proceed. But let's assume that we returned the correct order data, so the correct response, and an order was created by PayPal. So we check if the order data is the same as this server error PayPal string, and it should not be because there was no server error. However, if there was a server error, then we hit this if branch, and then we are going to return -1, which is a totally fake value, because in this then handler, what we are supposed to return is the ID of the order that was created by PayPal. And of course, -1 is an invalid ID. So in case a server error occurs, we are returning an invalid -1, and this will also break the process. Now, if there was no server error, then we have another if branch where we actually check if there is an ID. So this is how you can get the ID from this order data object. And if there is no ID, so if there is nothing here, then again we are showing an error and resetting the fields, and then we are returning -1, so the whole checkout process will break once again. However, if everything is fine, then we actually should get the order ID, so we should be able to return the order ID, and then the customer can pay, and then we can hit the OnApprove event. So this is actually what is happening in the create order event. So no doubt that it is much safer than the client-side integration, but as you can see, it is much more complicated. So even based on this demo site, you see that the client integration is a fewer lines of code than our server integration. But if we really dig into what is happening in the backend with the server-side integration and what is happening with the client-side integration, then I think you can agree with me that it is much more complicated to integrate PayPal server-side. However, I think it's worth it because it is more secure, and in the end, we want a more secure checkout. So if it's more work, then it's more work, but the end result, a more secure checkout, I think is worth it. So now we can move on, I think, to the OnApprove function, because our order was successfully created and we were able to return this return the ID of this newly created order. And now we arrived at the OnApprove event. Now in the OnApprove event, we have, of course, an anonymous function with two objects or two parameters, the data and the actions. And the data should be our order, so the order that was created. And it should have an order ID property, which is the ID of the created order. And the actions is also important for us, but it will come a bit later, so its importance will be obvious a bit later in this video. So let's just see what happens first. Let's just see what happens before this actions object comes into play. We are fetching our payment/capture order PayPal route, and we also add the ID of the order that was created. As I mentioned, we have the data object that contains our order, and it has an order ID property. So this is how we can get the ID of our newly created order. Now this is a post route, so the method has to be post. And actually here I define headers, actually one header, the cross-site request forgery token, and I'm just using Laravel's CSRF token helper, and of course the blade helper for echoing it out. So this is how we will make sure that we are protected from cross-site request forgeries. As you can see, I don't define a body for here, so a request object, because the only thing that we need actually is the order ID, and we can get the order ID, as I mentioned, from this data object. So let's see what happens in this capture order PayPal method. Of course, it's in the PayPal controller, and we are returning what the capture order method of the PayPal SDK helper class returns, and we have to pass the order ID to this method. So let's just go to the PayPal SDK helper, and yeah, we are here in the capture order method, and the parameter is the passed order ID. We are instantiating a new orders capture request, and the parameter is the order ID. So basically, we want this order to be captured, so we want the amount and the currency to be captured. And of course, this is also imported. So this orders capture request class is imported at the top of the file. Yeah, and then we are instantiating a new client. Now I described how we do it, how we instantiate a new client. So we are using the same client method here in this class. So in this client method, we are returning a new PayPal HTTP client, but of course the parameter is what the environment method returns. And you could see that if we are in a sandbox environment, then a new sandbox environment is returned. Otherwise, a new live environment is returned. But we talked about this more, so let me just go back to the capture order method. And then we are instantiating a response. And on the client object, we are calling execute, and we are executing the request. So basically, this response object should tell us if a payment was successful or not. And we are returning a response, obviously, and we are calling the JSON helper on this response object that we created. So this will be returned to the capture order PayPal method, and this is what the capture order PayPal returns. So we can finally go back to our JavaScript template and continue from here. As usual, we have this then handler with the response object. And if the OK property is false on this response object, it means that there was a server error. For example, the URL was not good, so we are returning the server error PayPal variable, which is just a string. But otherwise, so normally we should return this. So we should call the JSON method on the response object, and then actually in this then handler we will have access to the response that was actually returned by PayPal. So we save this response into this order data parameter, and if the order data is the same as this server PayPal variable, then of course we are returning and showing an error and resetting the fields so the customer can retry paying. However, there is no server error now, so we are just proceeding. And yeah, so these comments were taken from the PayPal demo application. And as you can see, three cases have to be handled. So we have this response, in this order data parameter, we have the response. So we will know if the payment was successful or the payment was not successful. So the first case is that the payment was not successful. And this first case is a recoverable error. So the instrument was declined, but we can still call actions.restart, and still the customer should be able to retry payment. Now, the second case is a non-recoverable error, and then PayPal is just showing a failure message, and then that's it. Then this checkout flow ends, and of course the customer can still retry, but it will be sort of a new checkout flow. And the third case is the transaction was successful, so we can show confirmation or a thank you page to our customer. Let's move on. So this comment is also from PayPal. So this example reads a v2/checkout/orders capture response propagated from the server. You could use a different API or structure for your order data. However, we don't want to use a different API in this demo application, so this is totally fine for us. What I mean, the next line is totally fine for us. So there is an error detail variable instantiated, and this is how you can get the error detail. So if you put this line of code here, then you will be able to check for an error. So if there is an error detail, and the issue property of this error detail is instrument declined, then it is a recoverable state, and we can restart the process. So we can return actions.restart. And I actually told you earlier that we have this actions parameter, and it will be important a bit later, and this is the point where it's important. So when there is an instrument declined error, then we can still restart this whole thing, and we can call the restart method on this actions object. And of course, we can read more about this if we follow this link. So this link is about the funding failures. Let's just follow this link. So we are here at handle funding failures. If your buyer's funding source fails, the orders API returns an instrument declined error. A funding source might fail for these reasons. The billing address associated with the financial instrument could not be confirmed. The transaction exceeds the card limit. The card issuer denied the transaction. This step is necessary if you are directly calling the orders API from your server. If you are using actions.order.capture, the PayPal script automatically restarts the checkout flow and prompts the buyer to select a different funding source. So what do we get to know so far? Let's say that the transaction exceeded the card limit, and in our previous integration, in the client integration, we indeed used this actions.order.capture. And if the problem is that the card limit was exceeded, then the actions order capture method, or the capture method, sort of automatically restarted the checkout flow, because then PayPal says that, okay, your payment was not okay because your card limit was exceeded, so do you want to restart the checkout flow? Maybe you could use another card. And this calling this actions order capture took care of this. So the PayPal script automatically restarted the checkout flow. However, we are not calling this, so we are not using the client-side integration, so we have to manually restart the checkout flow. And if we go back to the code, then this is what restarts the checkout flow. So this is why we have this restart method here. So this is why we call actions.restart if the error is instrument decline. So the script now doesn't do this automatically for us. In our previous integration, it was done automatically by the script. But let's get back to the website. Let's scroll down a bit. To handle this error, restart the payment in the OnApprove function so the buyer can select a different payment option. And as you can see, then we are returning actions.restart, or in this documentation, PayPal also returns actions.restart if the error is instrument declined. So basically the same thing that we are doing in our integration. Now, if there is an error and the issue is not instrument declined, or the issue property is not instrument declined, then it means that there was some sort of non-recoverable error. So then we have to show an error, we can reset our pay fields, and then we can return, and then we will not prompt the customer to restart the checkout flow with PayPal. But hopefully there will be no errors. So if there is no error, so if this error detail is null, or doesn't exist, then we will proceed with our checkout, and this should be very familiar to you. So we are showing the processing model, then we are adding the course ID to our form, then we add the transaction ID to our form as well, but notice that we have to get the transaction ID like this. So this was, I think it was different in our previous client integration. So this is actually, we have our order data object. Don't forget that this is what we passed on to this then handler, and then this is how we can get the transaction ID that will be shown on our dashboard, and this is the ID that we want to save into our database. And we are appending the payment data. So this is, the function that loads the rest of the hidden input fields in our form. And then we are sort of submitting this form. And from here, you actually know what is going to happen, because we are hitting, I believe, the fulfill order method in the checkout controller. Yes, the fulfill order method, and this method hasn't changed. So if you need a refresher, you can check in the client-side integration what is happening here. But basically, the order is created here for our backend here, and we associate the user with the course that the user bought. And of course, we redirect to the thanks route, so we will show a thanks page to our user. I will show successful PayPal purchase, but I think I will show also a few validation errors. So just to show you that the process is still the same. So although our integration is more complicated now, it's safer, but what the customer experiences on the front end is the same as with the client integration. So as promised, I will show you a few validation errors, and then I will show you that indeed our new server-side integration works. So let me just refresh this checkout page. It's the same course, the very expensive course for $555.55. I will fill in some dummy info. I want to pay with PayPal. However, I'm not going to tick this checkbox. So this is the first thing we fail. Yeah. Now I will tick the checkbox, but I will delete some necessary info. And I click on PayPal. And you can see that we failed the validation. However, we beautified the validation messages. So actually each failed validation is in its own line. Okay, so far so good. So now let's try to pay again without any validation errors. So no validation errors here. Okay, as you can see, the order was created, so $555.55. I click on Pay Now, and hopefully we will not have some kind of error. Okay, good. So you saw the model. It popped up for a while, and now we have the order confirmation page that go to the dashboard, and indeed I made this purchase of the German intermediate course. So our server-side PayPal integration works as expected.